Hello, we're just going to look in this video about how to estimate the size of an animal population using capture recapture. Animal populations are hard to estimate because as soon as you try to sample them, they move, they run out of your quadrat. So this is a different technique altogether, and this would be good for estimating things like beetles or grasshoppers. So the first thing that you do is you trap the animal that you are trying to work out the number of. Then you count the number, then you mark the animals that you have caught, and then you release them back into the environment. So you might have caught mice, you might have marked them with nail varnish, and then you release them back into the woodland. You need to leave them then for 48 hours. That gives them time to reintegrate into the population as normal. And then you trap again and you count all of the mice, and you count the number of those mice that are actually marked. And then the population size would be S1, which is the number caught and marked the first time, multiplied by S2, that is the total that you catch in the second sample. And then you divide that by R, which is the number of the second sample that had a nail varnish mark on them. Now you'll see lots of different versions of this, but in the questions you have to know what each of these things stand for. So that's the number caught and marked the first time, that's the number caught the second time the woodland is sampled, and then this number down below is the number that were marked the second time you caught a sample. So there are things that we have to note about this. So these are the notes, the things that keep coming up in mark schemes. So first of all, you must catch a large sample. So a large sample of mice. Why do you need that? That is so that you have a reliable estimate of the population. So how do you catch things? So obviously ground insects, invertebrates that creep along the ground, you would just catch them with a pitfall trap. If you're trying to catch insects in the grass, you would of course use a sweep net. The second note, the mark that you use should not be toxic. It should not kill the mice, because then you would obviously decrease the population. The mark should either be permanent or semi-permanent so that it doesn't wash off. And then the mark, it's really important that it doesn't make the mice more visible to predators. If that was the case, then they would be gobbled up by the predators, and whenever you did your second sample, you would find very few animals that had been marked. Another thing to note is when you release the animals after the first time, you have to allow enough time for the organisms to mix, to reintegrate. I have already mentioned that, and it's best to leave them for 48 hours before you resample. And finally, whenever you're trapping for the second time, you have to use the same trapping technique to recapture the animals. That's important. So in mark, release, recapture, there are some assumptions, and these are the assumptions. There has been no significant immigration or emigration between your sample 1 and your sample 2. There have been no significant births or deaths between sample 1 and sample 2. So there hasn't been an outbreak of poison or something like that. Another assumption is that trapping doesn't actually affect the animal. If trapping scared the animals, then the second time you were sampling, it's unlikely that they would run into the trap. So trapping should not affect the animals. And the other assumption is when you sample the second time, the organisms have mixed thoroughly with the population. So again, find some past paper questions on this, look at your mark schemes and see how you do.